All right, so you've sent over some really fascinating stuff, and it all revolves around this idea called the high five habit from the book with the same name. And what we're aiming for today in this deep dive is to kind of extract, I guess you could say, the most important pieces from all this material that you've given us so that you can really grasp this concept, this high five habit, and how it could genuinely impact your life. And it seems like at its core, this is all about improving the relationship you have with yourself, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what really jumps out is how simple this central idea is, the high five habit. You might even think at first glance, really, is that it? But the author makes a really strong case for how this seemingly straightforward practice can create some really significant change.
Yeah, and you know what I thought was really interesting? The book opens with a scene that I think a lot of people will probably relate to. The author is standing in front of her bathroom mirror, doing something ordinary like brushing her teeth. But then she kind of gets swept up in this wave of negative self-talk. Like, that feeling where you just start picking apart every little thing about yourself. You're tired, you're not happy with how you look, and all those insecurities come flooding in. I'm not good enough. I have too much to do. And this sense of overwhelm just kind of hits her even before the day has really started. Work pressures, family stuff, all those everyday concerns. It's like they're all crashing down at once.
And what really strikes me about that opening scene is the feeling of just being completely swamped, with all the demands and expectations of life. Like you're constantly focused on everyone else's needs and worries, and there's nobody really taking care of you. That feeling of just desperately wanting a break, some relief from it all, I think that's something a lot of people can connect with.
Totally. And it's in that moment when she's feeling totally depleted that something unexpected happens. It's this spontaneous thing. She lifts her hand toward her reflection, almost like a silent acknowledgement, and thinks to herself, I see you and I care about you. You've got this. It's like this tiny act of recognizing herself, offering herself a little bit of love in a tough moment. And I think what's important here is the idea that even a small gesture of self-compassion can be really powerful.
It is. That moment, that simple high five to herself, becomes the foundation of this whole concept. And what the author wants to explore is the story behind it, the research that supports it, and most importantly, how you listening right now can use this habit to create meaningful changes in your own life.
So let's get into it, shall we? One of the first things the author talks about is the power of encouragement and celebration. She recounts her own experience running a marathon, how physically grueling that can be. And she says that the constant cheers and high fives from strangers along the course were absolutely crucial in fueling her determination to keep going, especially when her body was screaming at her to stop.
Yeah, and I think what stands out there is the notion that a high five is more than just a physical gesture, right? It's like this transfer of energy, but more importantly, a transfer of belief. It's that external validation that can spark something inside you, reminding you of your strength, your capabilities, even when you might have momentarily forgotten them.
Exactly. And this brings up a question that's really worth considering. How much does criticizing yourself actually help? Seriously, think about it. Because what the author suggests is completely flipping that script. Instead of focusing on your flaws, what if you actively started cheering yourself forward? And how often do we actually do that? Give ourselves that same level of positive reinforcement that we might readily offer to others. The author points out that for most of us, the answer is probably almost never.
Right, and that's a really important point to honestly reflect on. How often are you your own cheerleader? The author's observation, which I think a lot of people might find resonates with them, is that we're really quick to encourage others, but when it comes to ourselves, we tend to default to self-criticism. And that ties in perfectly with that whole put on your own oxygen mask first analogy, right? Cheering yourself on is a fundamental way of putting your own well-being first.
That's it. She makes that exact connection to the oxygen mask analogy. It's not just about physical safety, it's about your emotional and mental state too. Being your own source of encouragement, your own advocate, that's how you prioritize yourself. And, too often we fall short on that self-encouragement and jump straight to self-criticism, which doesn't really help us move forward, does it?
No, not at all. And if we connect this back to that initial moment in the bathroom, that high five was a way to interrupt that downward spiral of negative thoughts. It was a small shift, but a significant one, towards a more supportive inner dialogue.
Okay, so let's move on to the idea of building self-worth. The author makes a really strong statement here. Those core feelings of self-worth, self-esteem, self-love, self-confidence, those foundational internal pillars, they have to come from within.
Absolutely. And that's where the central practice comes in, starting each day with a high five in the mirror. It's presented as this foundational habit, this small but powerful action to start building that internal sense of support and validation.
And she's clear that the book isn't just about this one gesture, right? It's going to explore a whole range of methods for making self-support a consistent part of your life, drawing on research, personal stories, and examples from people who have actually embraced this high five habit.
And what's really interesting is that it's not just presented as a technique. It's framed as a complete approach. It's about developing a particular mindset and using practical tools to essentially reprogram those deeply ingrained subconscious patterns that might be holding you back.
And I think it's worth considering the author's background here. She's a hugely successful motivational speaker, best-selling author. Her whole career is built on, in a sense, high-fiving others, instilling belief and encouragement in her audience. It's almost ironic, isn't it? Even those who dedicate their lives to encouraging others can sometimes struggle to offer that same support to themselves. It really highlights how universal this challenge is.
It does. There's a certain irony there, right? That someone whose work revolves around giving encouragement can find it tough to consistently give themselves that same support. It shows just how deep-rooted those patterns of self-criticism can be.
And the benefit, as the author sees it, is that when you learn to actively see and support yourself, it becomes easier to catch those moments when your mental state starts to slip. You can shift into a more positive, optimistic mindset more easily. And that positive outlook then leads to more motivated action. You're more likely to make positive changes in your life.
Exactly. And it all comes back to that initial image in the bathroom, right? The high five was a way to disrupt that cascade of negative thoughts and create a shift, however small, toward a more supportive inner dialogue.
So let's look at some of the science behind this. The author brings up some fascinating research, starting with the study of NBA players. Researchers at UC Berkeley looked at how often these players high-fived each other, how much encouragement they exchanged at the start of a season, and guess what? They found a correlation between the frequency of those interactions and the team's overall success by the end of the season.
That's fascinating, isn't it? The implication being that even something as simple as a high five can have a tangible impact on performance, on team cohesion. It suggests this deeper link between external support and internal belief and motivation.
Right. And then she talks about neurobics, which is basically the idea of stimulating new neural pathways in the brain to boost mental flexibility. She gives the example of this exercise used in a school to help students with dyslexia. It involved these cross-body movements, like touching lights on the opposite side of a board with the opposite hand. The idea behind neurobics is to get your brain working in new ways to build new connections.
And I love the parallel she draws here. That school intervention was literally trying to rewire the brain, forge new neural pathways, kind of like creating a new route, right? And she proposes that a high five can be a similar neurobic spark, a little jolt that can boost mental agility.
And what's so encouraging about this whole section is the message that no matter what your past experiences have been, no matter how deeply ingrained those negative habits might feel, a different future is possible. The high five habit, as she sees it, isn't about erasing the past. It's about changing you in the present, making you more resilient, better able to handle whatever life throws at you.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that you have the power to change and grow regardless of what's happened before. And one thing she emphasizes is that trying this habit can bring up some unexpected emotions. She acknowledges that for a lot of people, the simple act of high-fiving their reflection can be surprisingly emotional. She even shares stories of people who were caught off guard by how emotional they felt. And she makes it clear that this is really, really normal.
That makes sense. I mean, it's not just about starting the day on a positive note. She gives examples of how the high five habit can be a really helpful boost even during setbacks. Like, say, a company's facing poor sales or someone gets some tough feedback on a project. Instead of beating themselves up, that high five becomes a way to shift from self-blame to acknowledging the effort they put in.
Exactly. It's about reframing failure. She makes the point that failures aren't the opposite of success. They're learning opportunities. They're chances for self-acknowledgement, for the effort, not just a reason to criticize yourself. And I love how she flips that typical pattern of withholding any kind of reward until some far-off goal is achieved.
Right. And lastly, she brings it back to all the positive associations we already have with high fives, celebrating achievements with friends, acknowledging a teammate's good play. It's a gesture that's loaded with positive meaning. And by intentionally directing that habit towards yourself, she argues that you can actually change those subconscious patterns around self-perception, improve your mood, and potentially even change the course of your life.
Yeah, that's a powerful idea. It's like tapping into this reservoir of positive feelings and
Yeah.
consciously redirecting that energy inward.
So the author then explores this idea of self-torture and the impact of negative beliefs. And she shares this really touching story, a text message she got from one of her daughters, expressing these really negative feelings about herself, about her body. It's a reminder that these self-critical inner voices can be so pervasive, no matter how someone might appear on the outside.
Absolutely. That vulnerability her daughter shared really underscores how universal this struggle is. You can be outwardly successful, accomplished, but still have those internal battles with self-perception.
And this leads into a discussion of what she calls mirror face, those automatic negative thoughts that we have so often that they become our default way of seeing ourselves. It's like a well-worn path in our minds. But she points out the good news is that the science of neuroplasticity tells us that we can actually change these default settings. Our brains are adaptable. We can create new mental pathways.
That's the key, right? Recognizing that these negative thought patterns aren't set in stone. Neuroplasticity shows us that the brain can actually reorganize itself, form new connections throughout our lives. So even those deep-seated negative self-beliefs can be changed with conscious effort.
And she acknowledges that it's not always easy to pinpoint exactly when or how these self-critical beliefs formed. She even suggests therapy as a way to explore those roots. In her daughter's case, the feeling of always being the biggest one amongst her friends had become this persistent self-perception, which really shows how social comparisons can impact self-image.
It does. And it shows how those social comparisons, especially during those formative years, can really contribute to developing these negative self-beliefs. Even if they aren't entirely accurate, the feelings they evoke are real and can be really damaging to self-esteem.
And then she outlines this cycle that I think is so important. The more you engage in that negative self-talk, the more evidence you tend to see in your life that seems to confirm those beliefs, right? And that just reinforces those negative patterns and can shape your whole self-identity in a really damaging way. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It is. Our brains are naturally wired to look for information that confirms our existing beliefs, even if those beliefs are negative. And that confirmation bias can create this self-fulfilling prophecy where our negative thoughts actually shape our perception of reality.
And the message here is so empowering. You deserve to be celebrated for who you are right now, not just for what you achieve or when you reach some arbitrary milestone. And the research backs this up. Cultivating self-acceptance actually makes you more resilient to all the ups and downs life throws your way.
That's such an important distinction. We often condition our self-worth on achievements and external validation, but true self-acceptance is unconditional. It's about recognizing your inherent value as a human being, regardless of your circumstances or accomplishments.
She even shares this personal story about her son who decided to dye his hair blue in middle school, and she was worried about him fitting in at his new school. It's a really honest admission that, even she, with all her knowledge about this stuff, unintentionally sent the message that maybe there was something wrong with him for expressing himself that way. It highlights how easily we can prioritize fitting in over authentic self-expression.
It does. And it shows how even well-meaning parents can contribute to that pressure to conform, however unintentionally. That fear of social judgment can be so strong, even for us as adults, that we sometimes prioritize fitting in over just being ourselves.
And that connects to this broader point that we often learn to withhold love from ourselves. It's like we've internalized the societal message that others' opinions are more important than our own self-perception, and we need external validation to be worthy of love and acceptance.
Yeah, it's like we've learned this behavior of not prioritizing our own self-love. And it often comes from these external messages that we've absorbed from a young age. Breaking free from that constant need for approval from others is a huge step towards genuine self-acceptance.
She gives an example of feeling like the bad guy in relationships, even when she's just trying to set healthy boundaries and all the negative self-talk that came with that. And she talks about her husband's experience of feeling like a complete failure after his business collapsed. She emphasizes how those repeated negative thoughts solidify into beliefs that color your whole perception of reality.
Those personal examples are so powerful because they bring these abstract concepts to life. They show how specific life events can trigger and reinforce those negative self-beliefs, creating this pervasive sense of inadequacy or shame.
Right. And that this often leads to that feeling of it's too late to change after past mistakes. And she's incredibly open about her own struggles, bankruptcy, a failing marriage, anxiety, unemployment, even her initial unhealthy coping mechanisms. But she makes it very clear there are do-overs in life. Every morning is a new opportunity to choose who you're going to be. And the key, she says, is to shift your focus from dwelling on the past to creating what you want in the future. Look ahead, not in the rearview mirror.
I love that. It's so important to remember that each day offers a fresh start. We don't have to be defined by our past mistakes. We have the power to choose a different path.
And she recounts her negative experiences in law school, feeling like she didn't belong, the constant anxiety, even hitting rock bottom by not taking chances that came her way. It really paints a picture of how negative thoughts can spiral, creating this cycle where feeling inadequate leads to missed opportunities, which then fuels more negativity.
And that time in law school really shows how feeling out of alignment with your true self can amplify anxiety and negative self-perception. That sense of being stuck in a situation that doesn't feel right can really lead to a downward spiral of negative thoughts and behaviors.
She even describes how those thoughts can escalate into this catastrophic thinking that leaves you feeling totally suffocated. And the big realization for her was that self-hatred after those perceived failures only leads to more negative actions, whereas self-love actually fosters positive action and self-respect.
That's such a fundamental shift, isn't it? Recognizing that self-compassion, not self-criticism, is the key to breaking those negative cycles and fostering positive change.
It is. And ultimately, she reframes that feeling of being broken as often being blocked by negative thoughts, by past trauma, by upbringing. And she argues that the first steps are self-forgiveness and silencing that inner critic. It's about clearing those internal roadblocks so your potential can shine through.
I love that reframing. Being blocked rather than broken gives you a sense of agency.
Yeah.
It suggests that the potential is already there. It's just a matter of removing those obstacles.
So where do these negative thoughts come from? Well, she addresses that directly, stating that pretty much everyone has some kind of negative mantra or belief about themselves that they repeat over and over. It's a common human experience.
It is, and it's helpful to remember that, to normalize that experience. You're not alone in having these self-critical thoughts.
Right. But she challenges the usefulness of those thoughts. Even if there's some perceived basis for them, are they actually serving you in any positive way? Isn't it time to start feeling better about yourself?
Exactly. It's about acknowledging those thoughts, but then questioning their validity, their impact on your well-being. That's essential for moving forward.
And this leads to the introduction of the reticular activating system, or the RAS. She describes it as this filter in your brain that focuses on what it thinks is important. It's like a spotlight directing your attention.
The RAS is a fascinating part of the brain. It filters this massive amount of sensory information we're constantly bombarded with and directs our attention to the things that are relevant to our current focus, needs, and beliefs.
And the amazing thing is, you can train this system. You can actually teach your RAS to actively look for things you want to see, things that uplift and support you, and ultimately guide you towards your goals and dreams.
It highlights the active role we can play in shaping our perception of reality. By consciously directing our attention, we can influence what our brains prioritize and bring to our awareness.
The flip side, though, is that if your underlying self-perception is negative, your RAS is going to be programmed to find evidence to support that view. And she uses her husband's long-held belief that he's a failure as a really clear example of this in action. Even in neutral situations, his brain would be more likely to focus on any perceived signs of inadequacy.
It's a perfect illustration of how a negative self-belief can actually bias your perception.
Right.
Even in situations that might have some positive elements, if your RAS is programmed for negativity, it's going to hone in on anything that confirms that negative belief.
She shares the story of his failed restaurant business, the crushing debt, the fear that came with that, and she even talks about her own initial anger at having to become the primary breadwinner. But going through that really tough time, she realized how important it was to find a reason to get out of bed each day, even if it was just to feel a little less awful. And that period of hardship ultimately led to a lot of growth, a new direction for both of them.
And, she actually expresses gratitude for hitting that rock bottom. It was the catalyst for developing the 5-second rule and for her to understand her own strength and the power of forgiveness.
And even after things started to turn around professionally with her business growing, her husband's negative self-perception persisted. He saw his role in her business as a constant reminder of his past failure. It shows just how deeply ingrained these negative self-beliefs can become, even when external circumstances change for the better.
It really does. It emphasizes how those internal narratives can lag behind, even when things are objectively improving.
And she calls this the soundtrack of everyday life, right? Your RAS is filtering the world around you to confirm those core negative beliefs, whatever they might be. It's like your brain's tuned to a specific frequency.
It's a great analogy. Our internal dialogue acts like a soundtrack, and the RAS is tuned into the frequencies that align with our dominant beliefs, reinforcing those beliefs through that selected attention.
But the good news is, by consciously changing that internal narrative, you can shift the RAS's focus. It's about retraining your brain to look for different evidence, more positive evidence.
Exactly. By challenging and reframing those negative messages, you're essentially reprogramming your RAS to start noticing and focusing on the positive, the supportive aspects of your life.
And she introduces this idea of flipping those limiting beliefs, like changing "I screw everything up" to "I forgive myself for the things I did when I was just trying to survive. Every day I'm becoming a better version of myself." It's about replacing those negative scripts with new, more empowering ones.
Those flipped beliefs are like these positive affirmations that you can repeat to counter the negative ones. You're consciously creating a new, more supportive inner dialogue.
She uses this analogy of creating piles of glitter instead of garbage by choosing to shift your focus, your underlying beliefs. What you pay attention to matters.
Yeah, it's such a vivid image. It reinforces the idea that what you focus on is what you accumulate, mentally speaking. You shift towards positivity, and you start to gather more glitter positive experiences and perspectives.
And she comes back to the power of that high five in the mirror, combined with those positive affirmations first thing in the morning. It's like setting a new intention for the day, opening yourself up to a whole new world of possibilities.
It becomes a daily practice of reinforcing those new beliefs, that new narrative you're creating.
She shares more examples of these flipped beliefs. "I can solve any problem. This is preparing me for something amazing." It's about seeing challenges as opportunities for growth, for learning. It really can shift your perspective.
It reframes those challenges in a more empowering way.
Right.
It's about seeing the potential for growth instead of dwelling on the difficulty.
And the takeaway here is that you already have the mental flexibility to train your RAS. You probably just haven't realized it. Like when you're shopping for a new car, suddenly you start seeing that car everywhere, right? That's your RAS in action.
It's such a perfect everyday example. Once you set a focus, your brain starts filtering your environment to find information that's relevant to that focus.
So each day, your brain is going to start aligning with those new messages about what's important to you, what you want for your future. And it'll start filtering the world in a whole new way to help you get what you want. Seeing things differently won't magically erase problems, but it opens you up to seeing solutions, possibilities you didn't notice before.
That's where the power lies, right? You're not just changing your thoughts, you're changing how you interact with the world, how you see opportunities.
Now, beyond the mirror high five, the author introduces another seemingly simple but surprisingly effective way to train your RAS, the heart scavenger hunt. And she admits even her daughters were like, "Seriously, that sounds ridiculous."
Yeah, the skepticism is understandable. On the surface, it does sound a little unconventional.
So the idea is this. Every day, you actively look for heart shapes in the world around you, in rocks, leaves, oil stains in the parking lot, the swirl of your coffee. Anything counts.
It's not about magically creating hearts, but training your eye to notice the subtle heart shapes that are already there in your surroundings. It's a practice in visual focus.
And what's fascinating is she explains that this exercise, as silly as it might sound, actually makes you aware of the power of your RAS. You're telling your brain, "Hey, look for hearts," and suddenly you start seeing them everywhere. It proves that there's a different way to perceive the world and, by extension, to perceive yourself and your place in it.
It's like a low-stakes way to practice directing your attention consciously. And if you try it and think, "Nope, not seeing any hearts," that probably means you've subconsciously told your RAS that it's not important.
But if you go into it with an open mind, she suggests amping up the effect by pretending that each heart you find was intentionally placed there for you to discover. It kind of creates this feeling of connection, even guidance.
That's a nice touch. It adds this layer of positive interpretation to the whole exercise.
And she believes that these seemingly insignificant clues, these little hearts, can actually lead you towards those goals, those dreams you've been chasing, just by changing your perspective.
It cultivates this mindset of noticing positive signs, possibilities, which can then influence your actions and decisions in ways that move you towards what you want.
And this leads to the 3 steps she outlines for changing those negative soundtracks in your head. Step 1 is so simple but effective. When a negative thought pops up, You verbally tell yourself, I'm not thinking about that. It's a way to interrupt that thought pattern right away.
It's like a mental high five, swatting away the negative thought and redirecting your RES. You're making a conscious choice to disengage from the negativity.
Like, imagine you're worrying about a friend's delayed response, or you're feeling jealous scrolling through social media, or you see a photo of yourself and start criticizing your appearance. You catch yourself doing that, and you immediately say, I'm not thinking about that. It's like putting up a mental boundary.
It's like a circuit breaker, right? You're preventing those automatic negative thoughts from taking hold and escalating.
And she shares Christian's story, which is so inspiring. Christian used this high five habit, these positive beliefs, to overcome struggles with weight and confidence. She ended up becoming a health coach, focusing on mental well-being. And her big takeaway was that physical health is so deeply connected to mental well-being and how important it is to put yourself first.
It's a great reminder that our mental and physical health are intertwined. And by shifting her internal dialogue, cultivating self-love, she was able to take those positive actions that led to lasting change.
And it all ties back to that mirror high five in the morning. It's about creating those new pathways for self-cheering, making positive self-talk your default.
That daily practice of self-acknowledgement and encouragement is really key to rewiring those neural pathways and building a more supportive inner landscape.
Now let's talk about jealousy. The author acknowledges those feelings of inadequacy, of unfairness that jealousy can trigger, especially in today's world with all the social media comparisons. It can really bring out our insecurities.
Jealousy is such a powerful, often uncomfortable emotion. It can make you question your worth, your progress, and bring up those feelings of lack.
But she reframes it. She says jealousy isn't a bad emotion to be suppressed. It's an indicator of what you truly desire. Instead of feeling bad about it, she gives tools to shift your mindset from resentment to actively building the life you want.
It's a great reframe. Instead of seeing it as a sign of your own shortcomings, you can view jealousy as a compass pointing towards your unmet desires and aspirations.
She directly challenges this belief in a limited supply of success, happiness, love. If you're operating under the assumption that there's only so much to go around, of course you're going to feel threatened when you see others succeeding.
It creates that scarcity mindset that can be incredibly limiting. You're competing instead of recognizing the abundance of possibilities that are out there.
She talks about her daughter being jealous of someone living what seemed like a perfect life on a Mexican island, and she herself felt this sense of running out of time. It highlights how jealousy can be tied to those anxieties we have about our own lives, our own limitations, those desires that feel unfulfilled.
Yeah, that feeling of time slipping away can make jealousy even more intense, especially when you see others seemingly living out your own dreams.
And the flipped belief she offers here is so powerful. Their success is proof that I can have it too. Instead of seeing others' achievements as a threat, she encourages you to see them as evidence of what's possible.
That's a real mindset shift. Instead of negativity, it becomes a source of inspiration, motivation. It reframes their success as a beacon of possibility rather than a reminder of your own shortcomings.
And the author says jealousy is telling you something important. It's like a navigation tool pointing towards your desires. So turn towards it. Figure out what it is you truly want.
Engaging with it instead of avoiding it. It takes a level of self-awareness and a willingness to explore your own desires without judgment.
And she suggests using that mirror high five as a daily commitment to work towards what you want, to deserve it, and to empower yourself to go out and get it.
The high five becomes this symbol of that commitment, a daily reinforcement of your intention to actually take action.
She even gives practical steps, like reaching out to the person you're jealous of to learn from them and consciously following inspiring accounts on social media. To reprogram your RAS, show yourself more of what's possible.
Those are concrete things you can do to shift your focus and surround yourself with a more supportive environment that aligns with your goals. It's about actively seeking inspiration and learning from others' journeys.
And the big takeaway here is that taking action towards what you want is the most effective way to make jealousy disappear. You turn that stagnant energy into positive momentum.
Action is the antidote to jealousy. When you start working towards your own goals, that envy naturally diminishes because you're invested in your own progress.
She gives an example of someone feeling jealous of their brother's health transformation, recognizing that jealousy was actually a sign that they too desired a similar change. And she prompts you, the listener, to reflect. Who are you jealous of? What about their life speaks to you? And what are the negative thoughts that are holding you back?
It's about digging deeper, Getting to the root of those feelings, identifying those desires, those limiting beliefs that are holding you back.
The author even shares that she realized she needed to launch a podcast because she was feeling envious of that space and the action she took. She created a launch plan.
That's a great example of turning jealousy into inspiration. Instead of dwelling on it, she channeled that energy into creating a plan, taking those first steps.
And she makes this point. Taking action is what dispels jealousy and creates positive energy. On the other hand, if you're unwilling to work for what you envy, it often indicates a focus on lack, not on genuine desire.
That's a key distinction. True desire leads to action, while envy, without that willingness to put in the effort, often stems from focusing on what you think you're missing.
And here's the beautiful thing, she says. Flipping jealousy into inspiration actually acknowledges our interconnectedness. One person's success doesn't diminish your potential. It can lift everyone up. It turns those perceived competitors into potential allies.
It's a shift from a scarcity mindset to one of abundance and collaboration. We can learn and grow from each other's successes.
And she reminds you that as you find that confidence to move forward in your own life, you become a source of inspiration for others who might be feeling stuck. Your progress can have a ripple effect.
It's a wonderful reminder that your own journey of self-empowerment can inspire those around you.
Okay, let's tackle some tough emotions: courage, confidence, and guilt. And the author makes a really interesting statement here. Courage and confidence can actually dissolve guilt.
I like that perspective. We often think about managing guilt directly, but she suggests that focusing on building courage and confidence can be a more effective way to address it.
She shares a personal story about needing to have a difficult conversation with her father, about using his pool table as a workspace. It highlights that internal conflict, wanting to honor your own needs, but also not wanting to disappoint someone you love.
That's such a relatable situation. It's that constant balancing act in relationships, weighing our own needs against the desire to please those we care about.
And she acknowledges that relationships are about give and take, and that love and disappointment can coexist. It's not an either situation. People can have different feelings simultaneously.
Right. It's a more nuanced view of relationships.
Yeah.
Disagreements, disappointments, they're inevitable. But that doesn't mean there's no love or connection.
She shares her inner monologue leading up to that conversation with her dad. Those thoughts like, a good daughter would never do this. It highlights those expectations, often societal or familial, that can fuel so much guilt.
Those internal shoulds can be so powerful. They're often based on external expectations rather than our own genuine desires.
But she makes the point that difficult conversations happen when you decide it's time. It's about taking ownership, addressing the issue head on instead of avoiding it out of fear.
It's about being proactive, communicating openly, even when it feels uncomfortable.
And in her case, that honest conversation with her dad actually had a good outcome. Even her mom, who was initially sarcastic, ultimately responded with love.